I was watching one of Veritasium's recent videos, and the most liked comment reads like this. Sort of making light of the constant title and thumbnail changes. From a viewer's perspective, it may look like a silly thing to do, obsessively fishing for the most clicks. And I might have had that perspective too, but having started my own YouTube channel recently, I now understand a pretty fundamental concept that I think a lot of people simply watching YouTube tend to miss. When you see these attempts at maximizing clicks, you think, oh, they're greedy, they want to get in a few more views to increase the revenue margin just a little more. But it's not that simple. The fundamental problem is that there are a lot of, how can I say, low IQ individuals. Or, if you want to be less harsh, let's say low curiosity people. I will define curiosity as the willingness to explore things that don't naturally spark interest. To explain this better, let's look at a graph. On the x-axis, we will put this curiosity metric, and on the y-axis, you'll have the percentage of the YouTube audience that possess the corresponding curiosity. On one end of the spectrum, you have people with very low curiosity, meaning they only click on things that entice them immediately. Whilst on the opposite side, there are people who are willing to adventure into things that are not attention-grabbing. The middle is somewhere in between. Now let's call the attention-grabbing power of a thumbnail or title its clickability. The higher the clickability, the higher the chances that someone with low curiosity will click on your video. So if your thumbnail has a clickability of 20, only the top 20% most curious viewers will click, whilst with a clickability of 80, everyone but the 20% least curious will click on your video. The next concept to grasp, which you may be familiar with, is impressions. What are impressions? An impression is simply your video appearing anywhere on YouTube. The homepage, recommendations, the sidebar, and so on. Every time your little thumbnail shows in any of these places, that's called an impression. Based on your total potential viewership, when you publish your video, YouTube allocates a base amount of impressions. There are various factors that YouTube uses to determine your potential viewership, such as subscribers count, how many views your past videos got, and so on. For this example, let's say your video gets 100 impressions. If your clickability is 20, you will get 20 total views, or in other words, a 20% click-through rate. Whilst if the clickability is 80, then you will get 80 views, or a 80% click-through rate. In reality, click-through rate is not the same as your clickability, but it's directly proportional to it, so we can just assume they're the same for simplicity. So you may think, what's the point of constantly changing thumbnails and titles? Even if you can optimize this, and you can go from a clickability of 70 to a clickability of 80, you're only gaining 10 of 100 views, right? It's silly to do all that just for a 15% increase in viewership, especially when you're a large channel. You're just trying to squeeze in a few more dollars of ad revenue. That's what you may think. But here's one key component of this whole mechanism. YouTube does not simply predetermine your total impressions all at once when you publish the video, and that's it. It does so in multiple phases. In each phase, it allocates a certain amount of impressions. But here's the catch. The amount of impressions per phase is not fixed. For every subsequent phase, YouTube recomputes the impressions based on your click-through rate. This means that if you had 100 impressions in the first phase and your clickability is 20, so your click-through rate is 20%, YouTube will then likely allocate fewer impressions to the next phase, and if the click-through rate is again 20%, it will allocate even fewer for the following phase and so on for subsequent phases. In fact, it might not even go through subsequent phases if it thinks your click-through rate is too low, especially if your channel is small. This means clickability behaves exponentially, not linearly. A clickability of 80 instead of 70 may result in double or even triple the views. This is obviously extremely important if you have a small channel, but paradoxically even more important when you have a large channel, because you likely have staff and contractors working on your video. Cutting the views of one video in half can force a channel to lower production value in future videos, which then lowers views even further. It creates a vicious cycle. This is why all the big channels repeatedly change their titles, because a small increase in clickability will have a large exponential impact on your views and therefore your revenue. And I know what you're thinking now. YouTube should just change its stupid algorithm so that clickability doesn't have this massive power. But change it to what? The reality is, I don't think there's a better way of doing it. And proof for it is that every large platform has essentially arrived at the same conclusion. I'm an indie game developer, and I can tell you that Steam applies the exact same algorithm, where sales replace views and the metric becomes purchasability instead of clickability. But everything else works the same. When your platform has more content added to it that can be consumed by your user base, using your bottom line as a metric for interest and incentivizing the content that meets the metric is the best way to maximize satisfaction of said user base. The alternative would be for the platform to do a perfect analytical scan of the content and for everyone to have a chip implanted in their brain that knows exactly who you are so that the content can be matched perfectly to you without the need for titles or thumbnails. And that's ridiculous, of course. Even if AI can be leveraged for accurate content analysis, fully integrated cybernetic brain implants that know everything about you are at least 12 months away.